Garages. Of course there would be a ghost in there. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and don't go looking for stuff in those dark places. Unless you absolutely have to. Spirit noises trashing my garage. This experience occurred in Del City, Oklahoma, in a 2-story house on Chetwood Street. In the Hartsdale edition, I was 11 years old when this took place and since have moved on in a way. One evening, I was away with my half-sister and her father, attending a church get-together. When I returned home around 9 in the evening, I walked through the garage door to find my stepdad waiting for me. He told me he had to meet the paramedics at the hospital because my mom had been admitted to it. I had no time to ask questions as she had already run out and left. So I walked around and locked all the doors and turned the TV on to try and settle my nerves from worrying about my mother. The next morning, my stepdad informs me that she had been admitted to a psych ward due to a mental breakdown over grieving over my uncle's passing the year before. She had told my dad she was in her room and saw an evil face hovering in the corner of her room, and she shot at it, resulting in my stepdad calling 911. While I was sitting there, I feel and hear this loud rumble against the wall, which connects the living room and garage. Then, the noises started. It literally sounded like tools, glasses, pots and pans, boxes being thrown around and against the cement floor. I could hear our deep freezer's door being slammed shut as well. I mustered up enough courage to turn the lights on and hid behind the TV stand. I was terrified because I was alone and it was dark outside, so I couldn't see through the windows of the house. The noises went on for about 20 minutes or more. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped, leaving the house in almost complete silence. I stood up and walked towards the fireplace and picked out a poker with a pointed tip and slowly made my way to the garage door that leads into the house. I quickly turned the handle, swung open the door, and turned the lights on. And to my astonishment, nothing had been touched or disturbed. It was exactly how my stepdad had left it. I was so surprised and relieved at that time I couldn't go to sleep, so I waited up until he returned home. I told him what had happened, and of course, he didn't believe me. Activity in the garage. I live in a big house with my family. The house is about 17 years old, and my dad built it himself. The property was untouched when he started building the house, only a big forest and a couple mountains. I am 15 years old, and I have a lot of friends. And when I started having girls' nights and sleepovers, my room became kind of small. Therefore, my dad built a teenage room on the garage attic. It's a TV stereo and one big sofa. It is a really long stairs from the garage attic to the hallway. At the attic, there is 2 tight tunnels inside the walls, one at each side of the room. It is a great room, it really is, but I don't like it there. About 3 or 4 times when I have been on the garage attic, something strange has been happening. Once I had my best friend at a sleepover. Even though my room was big enough for us, the garage attic was bigger, so after a long evening with a lot of movies and sweets, we decided to go to bed. We wanted to sleep at the garage attic since we already had made the room so cozy and nice. I told her I was just going to get another blanket from the living room in the house, which is a couple hallways from the garage. She said okay, and I left for about 2 to 3 minutes. When I came back with a blanket, she said, "I thought you said you were going to get a blanket from the living room, and who did you talk to?" And I said that I did get a blanket. I didn't understand what she meant by who I talked to. She said, "When you left, you were just standing outside the door. I heard you or somebody talking quiet. I could also see your shadow through the door crack." I told her that was not me, and there was no one other than the two of us in the house. We did not sleep at the garage attic that night. Another time, when I had two other girls at visit, we went to the garage attic to watch a movie. In the middle of the movie, I had to get something from my room, so I ran quickly so I wouldn't miss anything of the film. When I arrived at my room, I couldn't find the thing I was looking for. It took me a couple of minutes before I found it. But when I had it and was ready to go to the garage attic, one of my friends was suddenly standing outside my room looking scared. Her face was a bit pale. I asked what was wrong, and she said, "We heard something coming up the stairs. At first we thought it was you who had been very quick finding that thing on your room, but it wasn't. I went out to see and nobody was there. I went back into the movie when suddenly we heard slamming inside one of the tunnels. I searched throughout the whole garage both times and I couldn't find anything that could have made those noises. I asked my parents and my siblings if they had been there and nobody had. Is this a ghost? Why would a ghost suddenly appear at our garage attic? There hadn't been any other houses on our property or any details. What is this? Also, there had been unexplainable electricity and power shutdowns." Thank you for reading, and please comment if you know anything about such things as this. Ouija board in the garage. Around 1984, when I was at the tender age of 14, a group of school friends and I decided to attempt a Ouija board in a friend's garage. It was a pretty dark night, so we set up candles to light a little chess table with Scrabble letters arranged in a circle and used a whiskey tumbler with a coin on top to ensure that no one could move the glass. The rationale being that if we pushed the coin, it would slide off and the tumbler would stay in place. The self-appointed controller of this experiment was a mature lad called Jason, who assured us that he knew all about how we should go about getting it to work. He started the proceedings by asking the standard, "Is there anyone there?" question. On the third attempt, he picked up the glass from the table and visibly flinched. When we asked him what the matter was, he said the glass seemed to split in two. Anyways, this was odd enough, but we carried on regardless, returning it back to the board and continuing with the questions. The board slowly started to answer our questions. Obviously, this was a long time ago, but I do remember that we asked if there was a true God, and it spelt out bullshit. Despite none of us being particularly religious, this did have a bit of an impact. Whatever we were talking to claimed to be an uncle of one of the participants who, unknown to us, had died in a motorcycle accident some years previous. Towards the end of our questions, I noticed that the energy of the tumbler seemed to increase to the point that the glass would shoot towards the Scrabble letters and knock them off the table. We asked if he'd like us to visit his grave. Our friend had told us where his grave was, and he answered yes. We said we'd take flowers and then asked him which flowers he would like. Now, throughout this experience, a few of us seemed to tire and occasionally close our eyes, seemingly involuntarily, and then come to again. At the point where we asked the question about flowers, I too had my eyes closed, and in my mind's eye, I saw a crystal clear image of a yellow daffodil. Directly after this, the board started to spell out daffodil. The connection between my mental image and the spelling out of this word unnerved me, and I felt like whatever was talking to us wasn't my friend's uncle at all, and I decided I wanted out. To my mind, this is when things began to change, but it could have been my fear kicking in. The table seemed to get knocked once or twice, but it was so dark, so we couldn't be sure. Also, there were a couple of bangs on the side of the garage too. It's nearly 30 years later as I'm writing this, and I'm getting shivers. And we asked the uncle if we could stop, and it spelt out, no. At this point, my friend Paul and myself took our fingers off the tumbler and left the garage to sit in my friend's garden. I remember we were both pretty distressed. It seemed that our remaining friends were fine to carry on. After a short while, Jason came out of the garage and said that the uncle had threatened Paul and myself, something about hurting our hands and face. It wasn't clear why this had occurred or even if it was true or not, but we went back into the garage and apologized, but didn't return to the board. They had all told the uncle they'd do another board soon, but had seemed to come to some agreement that they had had enough for that evening. I have no idea if this is the correct protocol, but we carried the table, Scrabble letters, tumbler and all, and smashed the glass in a gully that ran behind the friend's house. At that, we all ran off to our homes. Literally, we each, without any warning to the other, just ran away without saying goodbye. This seems odd when I look back on it. A few days later at school, we all discussed trying it again. I agreed, but dropped out at the last minute along with Paul, who had left the garage with me on the first occasion. We'd both seen enough and been freaked out enough to not want to repeat this experience. That night, Paul and I ran into the forest of our friends on a main road near where we lived. They just tried again and got through to the uncle, who had again answered their questions, knocked the table, and mentioned my friend and myself. Obviously, this could have been a bit of BS just to frighten us, and I'll never know that. However, what happened next has always stayed with me. I was eating a bag of crisps we just bought from a shop further up the road, and I offered one to my friend as he went to take one. I felt like I can only describe as a sort of physical or electric jolt. I'm not talking about an electric hand buzzer or anything so localized here. I'm talking about a powerful sensation that surged through me, eventually settling in my jaw and cheekbone area. My mouth instantly became bone dry, and I nearly choked on the crisp I had in my mouth. I remember swearing at him and stepping back, and he seemed genuinely surprised at my reaction and even a little frightened by it. We spoke to them about their experience a little longer, but I was pretty shaken and the sensation in my cheekbones had turned to a sort of ache. Later on that evening, the same thing happened when I touched a metal fence on my walk home and had a similar effect on me. Again, this really frightened me, and it's not a sensation I can accurately describe to this day. The following weeks, I had night sweats and sleepless nights, and for a long time afterwards became convinced that something or some energy had hit me that night that I just can't explain or fathom. I still ponder on what Ouija boards could be: spirits, collective energies of people involved, or something even more exotic or elaborate we can't really conceive of. But one thing I do know is that I will never sit in on one again.